The mineshaft collapsed at exactly 0347 station time, burying 3 workers under 1,000 tons of rock. The rescue teams didn't hesitate. They never did. Within minutes, human miners were digging through the debris with their bare hands, ignoring the toxic dust that would have killed any other species in the galaxy. Marcus Webb pulled the last survivor from the rubble just as the Concordat inspection shuttle landed on the surface above. He wiped the blood from his face and looked at his crew. 17 men and women covered in dirt and sweat, exhausted from a double shift in conditions that violated every safety regulation the Concordat claimed to enforce. "Inspection team," said his second-in-command, a woman named Chen. "Third one this month." Marcus nodded slowly. The inspections had increased lately. So had the fines. So had the violations that nobody could explain. The Concordat was squeezing them, and everyone knew it. They gathered in the main processing hall as ordered. The inspection team consisted of 5 Solari officials, tall and thin, with pale blue skin that had never known hard labor. Their leader, a bureaucrat named Kethvorin, walked among the human workers like a farmer examining livestock. "Production is down 14%, Kethvorin announced. His translator gave his words a flat, mechanical quality. "This is unacceptable." "We lost 3 shafts to geological instability," Marcus said. "Your own surveyors cleared those areas. We filed reports." "Excuses." Kethvorin waved a thin hand. "The Concordat has been patient with your species. Too patient, many believe. You were given the privilege of serving the greater galactic community, and this is how you repay us." Marcus felt his jaw tighten. 3 centuries. For 300 years, humanity had worked the most dangerous jobs in the galaxy. They mined worlds that no other species could survive. They built stations in radiation zones. They served as emergency responders, as hazardous material handlers, as the workers who went where others refused to go. And still they were called guests. Still they were denied membership in the council. Still they were treated as something less than equal. "We've met every quota for the past 6 years," Marcus said quietly. "Every single one." Kethvorin's eyes narrowed. "Are you arguing with me, human?" The silence in the processing hall was absolute. Every worker knew what happened when humans argued with Concordat officials. Everyone had heard the stories. Most had seen the consequences firsthand. "No," Marcus said finally. "I'm stating facts." "Facts." Kethvorin smiled, a thin and ugly expression. "Here is a fact for you. This facility is in violation of Concordat Resource Directive 447. The penalty is immediate termination of operations and detention of supervisory personnel. That directive doesn't apply to active mining operations. It applies wherever I say it applies. What happened next would be replayed across every human settlement in the galaxy." Kethvorin raised his hand, and the 4 Solari guards behind him drew their weapons. They didn't aim at Marcus. They aimed at the workers. 17 violations, Kethvorin said. 17 examples. The shots came fast. Chen fell first, then Rodriguez, then Kim. Marcus screamed and lunged forward, but a guard struck him down with a blow to the skull. He lay on the cold floor, blood pooling around his head, and watched his people die one by one. When it was over, Kethvorin stepped over the bodies and looked down at Marcus. "Consider this a lesson," he said. "Learn from it." The shuttle lifted off 20 minutes later. Marcus sat among the dead, holding Chen's hand, and made a promise that would change the galaxy forever. The news spread faster than any official channel could contain it. Human communication networks, built over centuries of quiet preparation, carried the footage to every colony, every station, every ship where humans lived and worked. On Earth, the United Terran Assembly convened within hours. The representatives arrived in silence. There were no opening statements, no procedural debates. Everyone had seen the footage. Everyone knew what had happened. Admiral Yuki Tanaka stood before the assembly, her uniform crisp and her face carved from stone. She was 63 years old, and she had spent her entire career preparing for this moment while hoping it would never come. "What happened on Kepler 442c was not an isolated incident," she said. Her voice carried across the silent chamber. "It was not a mistake. It was not the action of a rogue official." She pressed a control, and data flooded the screens around the chamber. For the past 18 months, Concordat Intelligence has been developing a biological weapon specifically designed to target human physiology. They call it Project Cleansing. The weapon attacks our nervous system. Death occurs within 72 hours. There is no cure. The silence broke into angry murmurs. Representatives shouted questions. Some wept. Admiral Tanaka waited for the noise to subside. "We have confirmation from 3 independent sources," she continued. "The weapon is complete. Production facilities are already operational. We estimate deployment capability within 6 months." "How long have you known?" someone demanded. 18 months. "And you said nothing?" "We were gathering intelligence, building our response." Tanaka's eyes swept the chamber. "We have been preparing for this moment for 200 years. She told them everything then. The hidden shipyards in dead systems, the training programs disguised as recreational activities, the intelligence networks that reached into every corner of Concordat space. The weapons research conducted in secret facilities that officially did not exist. Humanity had smiled and bowed and accepted their place as second-class citizens, and all the while they had been getting ready, watching, waiting, building. "The Concordat believes we are weak," Tanaka said. "They believe we are broken. They are about to learn otherwise." The vote was unanimous. After 3 centuries of patience, humanity was done asking for a seat at the table. The declaration went out on all frequencies at midnight, Universal Standard Time. It was broadcast in every known language, transmitted on every channel, sent to every world and ship and station in the galaxy. "To the Galactic Concordat and all who stand with them. For 300 years, humanity has sought peaceful coexistence. We have worked your most dangerous jobs. We have built your stations and mined your worlds. We have asked only for fair treatment and equal standing. You answered with contempt. You answered with exploitation. You answered with murder. We have evidence that the Concordat is developing weapons designed to exterminate our species. We have documentation of systematic abuse, of deliberate atrocities, of calculated cruelty spanning centuries. Therefore, humanity withdraws its petition for membership in the Galactic Concordat. We withdraw our labor. We withdraw our compliance. We withdraw our presence from your worlds and your stations and your ships, and we withdraw our mercy. This is not a request. This is not a negotiation. This is a declaration of war. You had 300 years to treat us as equals. You chose to treat us as animals. Now you will discover what kind of animals we are. To any species that stands aside, we offer peace. To any species that stands with the Concordat, we offer only this warning. What comes next is not our choice. It is yours." The transmission ended. Across the galaxy, silence fell. On the Concordat capital world, the High Council gathered in emergency session. Ambassador Keth Voren, now the most hated being in human space, presented his assessment. "The humans have no fleet," he said confidently. "They have no military infrastructure. They have no allies. This declaration is nothing but desperation, a bluff designed to buy time." The council members nodded. It made sense. The humans had nothing. Everyone knew this. "I recommend we accelerate Project Cleansing," Keth Voren continued. "Deploy the weapon within 30 days. End this rebellion before it begins." "And the other species?" someone asked. "The Rithani? The Methani? They may object." "Let them object. By the time they react, the human problem will be solved permanently." The vote was quick. The motion passed. Keth Voren smiled and thought about the promotion that would surely follow. He did not know that human intelligence had compromised his personal communications 3 years ago. He did not know that every word of the council session was being transmitted to Admiral Tanaka in real time. He did not know that humanity's desperate bluff was about to become the worst mistake the Concordat had ever made. Across the galaxy, ships began to move. They emerged from asteroid fields where they had hidden for decades. They powered up in abandoned stations that Concordat surveys had declared empty. They rose from the surfaces of dead moons where no sensor had ever thought to look. Cargo haulers revealed weapon systems that had never appeared on any manifest. Mining vessels deployed armor plating that had been disguised as hull reinforcement. Transport ships launched fighters from holds that supposedly carried grain. 200 years of secret preparation. Tens of thousands of ships, millions of trained personnel. The stars themselves seemed to shift as humanity's hidden fleet assembled in the darkness between worlds. On the bridge of the flagship Remembrance, Admiral Tanaka watched the tactical display fill with green icons. So many ships, so many people ready to fight and die for a cause they had inherited from their grandparents' grandparents. Admiral, her communications officer said, "All units report ready." Tanaka nodded slowly. There was no joy in this moment, only grim necessity, only the weight of centuries of anger and pain and hope. "Send the following to all commands," she said. "The time for patience is over. The time for submission is over. Today we stop asking. Today we stop waiting. Today we take back our future." She paused, thinking of Kepler 442c, thinking of Chen and Rodriguez and Kim, thinking of every human who had suffered and died under concordate rule. "Today," she said quietly, "we show them why they should have been afraid." The fleet began to move, and across the galaxy the stars erupted with the light of a war that would change everything. The Concordate's border monitoring station Delta 7 had operated continuously for 400 years. It watched the space lanes between Concordate territory and the outer colonies, tracking every ship that passed through its sensors. Nothing moved in this sector without Delta 7 knowing about it. Station Commander Velrath checked the displays for the 100th time that night. The human declaration had everyone nervous. Extra patrols had been ordered. All leaves had been canceled. But so far, nothing had happened. "Probably just talk," his second officer said. "The humans have no capability for real warfare. Everyone knows this." Velrath nodded, but something bothered him. He had worked with humans before, years ago on a joint mining operation. He remembered how they moved, how they thought, how they never seemed to give up no matter how bad things got. He remembered something else too, the way they smiled when things went wrong. Not with fear, but with something that looked almost like anticipation. "Run a full sensor diagnostic," he ordered. "Maximum range sweep." "Sir, we just did one 3 hours ago." "Do it again." The diagnostic ran. The screens flickered. And then, one by one, the border sensors began to go dark. "What's happening?" Velrath demanded. His second officer worked frantically at the controls. "I don't know. We're losing stations. Delta 4 is gone. Delta 5 is gone. Delta 6 just went offline." "Attacked?" "No weapons fire detected. They're just gone." Velrath stared at the display as the darkness spread. Station after station disappeared from the network, moving in a perfect sequence toward his position. Whatever was coming, it was coming fast. "Send an alert to High Command," he said. "Tell them." The lights went out. The screens went black. The hum of the station systems fell silent. In the darkness, Velrath heard something he had never heard before. The sound of human boots on metal deck plating. Many boots, moving with perfect coordination. A light appeared in the doorway. Behind it, he could see the outline of armored figures. Human figures. "You have two choices," a voice said calmly. "Surrender or don't. Either way, this station belongs to us now." Velrath surrendered. Operation Homecoming began at 600 Universal Standard Time, exactly 48 hours after the declaration of war. It was the largest coordinated action in human history, and it happened so smoothly that most of the galaxy didn't realize what was occurring until it was already over. On every concordate world, in every station and facility where humans lived and worked, the evacuation began. Ships appeared from hiding places that no one had ever suspected. Transport vessels that had been broken down for years suddenly came back to life. Shuttles lifted off from landing pads that weren't supposed to have any shuttles. The Concordate tried to stop them. On a dozen worlds, garrisons moved to block the evacuation routes. They expected frightened refugees, desperate civilians fleeing toward uncertain safety. What they found was something very different. Commander Lin Zhao had worked in the processing plant on Veth Prime for 12 years. She had filed paperwork. She had managed schedules. She had smiled at Concordat officials and pretended to be grateful for the opportunity to serve. She had also been running combat training sessions in abandoned mine shafts for the past 8 years. When the Concordat garrison commander ordered all humans confined to their quarters, Lin gathered her people in the main factory hall. 300 workers, most of them women, many of them elderly. The garrison commander looked at them and laughed. "This is your resistance?" he asked. "Workers? Laborers?" Lynn smiled. It was the kind of smile that Velrath would have recognized. The kind of smile that came just before everything changed. "We are human," she said simply. "That is enough." The garrison had 200 soldiers, professional military, well-equipped and well-trained. They expected no resistance. They expected an easy operation. The battle for Veth Prime lasted 6 hours. When it ended, the garrison commander was in human custody, and his soldiers were either dead or captured. Human casualties were 17 wounded, none dead. Lynn's people had practiced this scenario 1,000 times. They knew every corridor, every doorway, every shadow in the facility. They knew how to use industrial equipment as weapons. They knew how to fight as a team, how to support each other, how to keep going when everything hurt and every muscle screamed for rest. They knew these things because they were Deathworlders, and Deathworlders never stopped fighting until the fight was over. The Concordate High Council met in continuous session as reports flooded in from across their territory. The news was uniformly bad. Human populations were vanishing. Ships were appearing from nowhere. Border defenses were collapsing. And worst of all, the humans weren't just running, they were fighting. "This is impossible," Kethavorn insisted. "They have no military training. They have no weapons. They have everything," Admiral Kelveth interrupted. He was the Concordate's senior military commander, and his face was grim. "They have been preparing for this for 2 centuries. Every cargo ship we let through our borders was carrying hidden weapons. Every mining operation was a training camp. Every human settlement was a military base disguised as a civilian facility. How did we miss this? Because we weren't looking. Because we believed our own propaganda. Because we thought they were animals, and animals don't plan." Kelveth's voice was bitter. "We were wrong." Kethavorn slammed his fist on the table. "Then accelerate Project Cleansing. Deploy the bioweapon now. The production facilities aren't ready for full deployment. We need at least 3 more weeks. We may not have 3 weeks. Then we fight with what we have." Kelveth straightened. "I'm mobilizing the Third Fleet, 600 warships. We'll crush them before they can organize properly. And if that's not enough, it will be enough. They're still humans, still Deathworlders. They may have surprised us, but they cannot match our firepower." Kelveth smiled coldly. "We'll burn them out of the sky." 3 light-years away, in a system that appeared on no Concordate map, the Terran First Expeditionary Force waited in the darkness between stars. Admiral Tanaka studied the intelligence reports with quiet satisfaction. Operation Homecoming was proceeding ahead of schedule. Human populations were being evacuated from Concordate space faster than anyone had expected. And the enemy was reacting exactly as predicted. "The Third Fleet is mobilizing," her intelligence officer reported. 600 warships. They're heading for the Varantes corridor. "Good. That's exactly where we want them." Tanaka turned to her tactical officer. "What's our strength?" 400 warships, 200 support vessels, full ammunition and fuel supplies. "Against 600. "Yes, Admiral." Tanaka nodded slowly. The numbers weren't in their favor. But numbers weren't everything. The Concordate had spent centuries underestimating humans. They were about to learn what that mistake really cost. "Send word to all commands," she said. "We meet the Third Fleet in the Varantes corridor. This will be our first major engagement. We need to win, and we need to win decisively." "The crews are ready, Admiral." They've been ready for generations. Far from the coming battle, on a neutral world near Rathani space, a human diplomatic vessel requested landing permission. The Rathani were the Concordate's oldest rivals, a powerful empire that had watched humanity's treatment with quiet disapproval. The human ambassador was a young woman named Sarah Chen. She was no relation to the Chen who had died on Kepler 442c, but she had watched that footage like everyone else. She carried that anger with her now, controlled and focused. The Rathani emperor received her in his private audience chamber. He was old, his scales faded with age, but his eyes were sharp and curious. "You come to us at an interesting time," he said. "The galaxy speaks of nothing but your war." "I'm not here to ask for alliance," Sarah said directly. "We don't need your ships or your soldiers." "Then what do you want?" Sarah placed a data crystal on the table between them. This contains complete sensor data from the past 72 hours. Troop movements, fleet positions, communication intercepts. It shows exactly what the Concordat has been doing and exactly how badly they've underestimated us. The Emperor's eyes narrowed. Why share this with us? Because I want you to watch. When the Third Fleet meets our forces, I want you to see what happens. I want you to understand what humans are capable of when we stop pretending to be weak. And after we watch, Sarah smiled, after you watch, you'll know that the Concordat's time is ending. You can position yourself accordingly. Or you can pretend nothing has changed and be caught unprepared when the old order collapses. The Emperor studied her for a long moment. Then he took the crystal. I will watch, he said, and I will remember that you came to share information, not to beg for help. That tells me more about your people than any battle could. Sarah bowed and turned to leave. At the door, she paused. One more thing, she said. The Concordat has been developing bioweapons to exterminate humanity. You might want to consider what they'll develop to use against you once we're gone. She left the Emperor sitting alone with that thought and the weight of the data crystal in his hand. The Concordat's Third Fleet entered the Varantis corridor at full combat speed. 600 warships, the pride of their military, commanded by Admiral Kelveth himself. They expected to find scattered human vessels fleeing toward some distant refuge. What they found was a wall of ships blocking the corridor, 400 human warships arranged in perfect formation, weapons hot and shields raised. They're not running, someone on the bridge whispered. Admiral Kelveth stared at the tactical display. The human ships were different from anything in the Concordat's records. They were smaller, faster, more maneuverable, and there were far more of them than should have been possible. Where did they get those ships? He demanded. Unknown, Admiral. No construction records, no purchase history. They don't appear in any database. Because they were built in secret, Kelveth realized. Built in hidden shipyards over 2 centuries. Built by people who knew this day would come. The communication screen flickered. Admiral Tanaka's face appeared, calm and controlled. Admiral Kelveth, she said, I'm giving you one chance to withdraw. Turn your fleet around and return to Concordat space. This doesn't have to be a slaughter. You're outnumbered, Kelveth said. You cannot win this battle. We're human, Tanaka replied. We've been outnumbered our entire existence. It hasn't stopped us yet. The screen went dark. Kelveth straightened in his command chair. All ships, he ordered. Attack formation. Destroy them. The Third Fleet surged forward. The human fleet held its position, and in the darkness between the stars, the war for humanity's future truly began. The first wave of Concordat missiles slammed into the human defensive line with enough force to crack a small moon. Energy shields flared bright blue across the formation. Ships shuddered under the impact. Damage reports began flooding command channels. Admiral Tanaka watched the battle unfold from the Bridge of the Remembrance. Her ships were holding, but the pressure was immense. Kelveth was throwing everything he had at them, trying to break through by sheer weight of numbers. Shields at 62%, her tactical officer reported. Forward cruisers taking heavy fire. Hold the line, Tanaka ordered. Let them commit. The Concordat fleet pushed forward, confident in their superiority. Their ships were larger, their weapons more powerful, their numbers greater. Every military doctrine they had ever studied said this battle should be over quickly, but the humans weren't fighting by any doctrine the Concordat recognized. Now, Tanaka said quietly, execute Maneuver 7. The human formation split apart like a breaking wave. Ships that had been holding position suddenly accelerated in all directions, moving with a coordination that seemed almost impossible. They dove between Concordat vessels, twisted through killing zones, exploited gaps that existed for only seconds. Admiral Kelveth watched in confusion as his orderly battle lines dissolved into chaos. Human ships were everywhere, moving too fast, changing direction too quickly, appearing where they shouldn't be, and vanishing before his gunners could track them. They're running their engines above safety limits, his engineer reported, voice shaking. No ship should be able to maneuver like that. The acceleration forces alone should be killing their crews. But the human crews weren't dying. They were fighting. Deathworld physiology. Humans had evolved on a planet of crushing gravity, toxic atmosphere, and constant environmental threat. Their bodies could handle stresses that would incapacitate other species. Their reflexes were faster. Their pain tolerance was higher. Their ability to function under pressure was almost supernatural by galactic standards. The Concordat had known these facts for 3 centuries. They had used them to justify sending humans to the most dangerous jobs in the galaxy. What they had never considered was what would happen when those same advantages were turned to warfare. Lieutenant Commander James Okonkwo flew his destroyer through the heart of the Concordat formation, weaving between warships that dwarfed his vessel like mountains surrounding a sparrow. Alarms screamed in his ears. His acceleration couch groaned under the strain of constant high-G maneuvers. Blood pounded in his temples as his body fought against forces that would have crushed a Sillery pilot into paste. He smiled grimly and pushed harder. "Target acquired," his weapons officer called out. "Concordat cruiser, direct hit opportunity. Fire everything." The destroyer's weapons spoke in unison. Plasma bolts and kinetic rounds slammed into the cruiser's engine section. The larger ship staggered, trailing flame and debris. Before its crew could respond, James was already gone, diving toward his next target. All around him, human pilots were doing the same thing. Small, fast ships dancing through the Concordat fleet, striking and disappearing, refusing to stand still long enough to be hit. It was chaos, but it was controlled chaos. Every pilot knew their role. Every ship knew its position in the greater dance. The Concordat gunners couldn't track targets moving that fast. Their commanders couldn't issue orders quickly enough to match the fluid human tactics. They had trained for a different kind of warfare, a civilized kind, where fleets lined up and exchanged fire until one side broke. Humans didn't fight civilized wars. They fought to survive. And survival meant using every advantage, exploiting every weakness, never giving the enemy a moment to breathe. On the bridge of the Concordat flagship, Admiral Kelveth was beginning to understand the scale of his mistake. His fleet had numerical superiority. They had larger ships and more powerful weapons. By every standard measure, they should be winning. But standard measures didn't account for crews who could function at 10 Gs of continuous acceleration. They didn't account for pilots whose reaction times were 3 times faster than galactic average. They didn't account for a species that had spent its entire existence fighting to survive against impossible odds. "Admiral, we've lost the cruiser Valanthe," his aide reported. "The dreadnought has taken critical damage. 3 more destroyers destroyed in the past 5 minutes. Pull back the forward elements. Reform the line." "Sir, they're not letting us reform. They're in among our ships. If we try to regroup, we'll be hitting our own vessels." Kelveth stared at the tactical display. 60 ships lost already, dozens more damaged. The humans had lost perhaps a quarter of that number. For the first time in his career, he felt something he had never experienced in battle: doubt. "Continue the attack," he ordered anyway. He had no other choice. Retreat would mean admitting that everything the Concordat believed about humans was wrong. It would mean confessing that they had created an enemy they couldn't defeat. Better to die here than face that truth. The battle raged for 6 hours. By the end, the Varantes corridor was a graveyard of burning ships and drifting debris. The Concordat's Third Fleet, the most powerful force in their military, had been broken. Admiral Kelveth died when a human destroyer sacrificed itself to ram his flagship. 300 human sailors gave their lives to kill one enemy admiral. It was a trade they made willingly. The survivors of the Third Fleet fled in disorder, pursued by human ships that seemed to never tire, never slow, never give up the chase. Of 600 Concordat warships, fewer than 200 escaped. Admiral Tanaka surveyed the aftermath from her damaged bridge. The Remembrance had taken severe punishment. Her shields were gone, her hull was scarred, and 87 of her crew would never see another sunrise. But they had won. "Send word to all commands," she said quietly. "The Third Fleet is destroyed. Varantes corridor is ours." The message spread across human space in minutes. On colony worlds and hidden stations, in ships still fighting their way out of Concordat territory, humans received the news and felt something they hadn't felt in 3 centuries: hope. The Concordat's response to their defeat was swift and terrible. On the colony world of New Brisbane, 14 million humans lived in cities built over generations. They were farmers and teachers, engineers and artists, families who had never lifted a weapon in their lives. They had nothing to do with the war. They were simply there. The Concordat didn't care. The bioweapon arrived in unmarked canisters, dropped from orbit by a ship that never entered weapons range. It dispersed through the atmosphere in hours. By the time anyone realized what was happening, it was already too late. The weapon attacked the human nervous system, just as the intelligence reports had predicted. It started with headaches and confusion. Then came the seizures. Then came death. New Brisbane's hospitals were overwhelmed in the first day. By the second day, the hospitals were empty because the doctors had died alongside their patients. By the third day, the cities were silent. 14 million people. Dead in 72 hours, an entire world murdered because the Concordat couldn't accept defeat on the battlefield. The news reached Admiral Tanaka at 300 ship time. She read the report in silence. She watched the footage that survivors had managed to transmit before they too succumbed. She looked at images of children lying in the streets, of families dead in their homes, of a civilization erased by hatred and fear. She didn't weep. She didn't rage. She simply sat in her quarters for a long time, staring at nothing. When she emerged, her face was different. The hesitation was gone. The doubt was gone. What remained was something colder and harder than anything her crew had seen before. "All command," she said, her voice carrying across every human ship in the fleet. "They have shown us what they are. They have shown us that there can be no compromise, no negotiation, no peace with those who would murder our children to save their pride." She paused, and when she continued, her voice was quiet but absolute. "We will not answer with genocide. We will not become what they are, but we will no longer hold back. We will no longer show mercy to those who order such crimes. We will hunt down every architect of this atrocity. We will dismantle every facility that produced this weapon, and we will ensure that nothing like this can ever happen again." Her final words echoed through the fleet like a battle cry. They wanted war. Now they have it, and they will learn that there is nothing in this galaxy more dangerous than a human with nothing left to lose. The war changed after New Brisbane. The careful strategy, the measured responses, the hope for eventual reconciliation, all of it burned away in the fires of 14 million dead. Human forces pressed their advantage with relentless fury. Colony after colony fell as Tanaka's fleet swept through Concordat space. Populations that had lived under Concordat rule for millennia watched in amazement as human soldiers arrived not as conquerors, but as liberators. On world after world, species that the Concordat had oppressed for generations saw the footage from the Varantes corridor. They heard about New Brisbane. They watched humans fight and die for freedom, and they began to ask dangerous questions. Why should we accept Concordat rule? If the humans can fight back, why can't we? The war was no longer just about humanity. It was about everyone the Concordat had ever crushed beneath their heel. In the depths of Concordat space, the Methani people watched and waited. They had been a client species for 3,000 years, bound to the Concordat by debts that could never be repaid. Their worlds belonged to Concordat corporations. Their labor enriched Concordat citizens. Their children were born into service and died the same way. The Methani Elder Council met in secret, in chambers that Concordat surveillance could not reach. They watched footage of human victories. They read reports of New Brisbane. They debated what it all meant. "The humans are winning," one elder said. "The Concordat is afraid. We may never have another chance like this. If we rise and fail, the punishment will be beyond imagination. If we don't rise, we remain slaves forever." The eldest Methani, a female who had seen 2 centuries of servitude, spoke with quiet certainty. "I would rather die fighting than live kneeling." The vote was close, but in the end, the Methani chose hope over fear. The first Concordat garrison to fall to Methani, rebels fell on the same day that Admiral Tanaka's fleet crossed into the core territories. The second fell hours later. By the end of the week, 17 Methani worlds were in open revolt. The galaxy was burning, and in the flames, something new was being born. 6 months after the war began, the Concordat was dying. Everyone could see it now. The great empire that had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years was crumbling from within. Admiral Tanaka stood on the observation deck of the Remembrance, watching the stars drift past. They were deep in Concordat territory now, closer to the core worlds than any human ship had ever traveled. Behind her fleet lay a trail of liberated systems and shattered defenses. Ahead lay the heart of the enemy. She thought about New Brisbane every day. 14 million faces she would never see. 14 million voices silenced forever. The weight of them pressed on her soul like chains. But she also thought about what came after. On every world her forces had taken, she had ordered the same thing: protect the civilians, preserve the infrastructure, prepare for reconstruction, no reprisals, no revenge killings, no becoming the monsters they were fighting. Some of her captains questioned these orders. After New Brisbane, they said, the Concordat deserved to burn. They deserved to feel the same pain they had inflicted. Tanaka understood the anger. She felt it herself, burning cold in her chest. But she had made a choice in those dark hours after learning about the bioweapon. She had decided what kind of war this would be. We're not fighting to destroy them, she told her officers at every briefing. We're fighting to make sure they can never hurt us again. Those are different goals. One leads somewhere worth going, the other leads nowhere at all. The liberation of Methani Prime would become one of the most celebrated moments in galactic history. Human forces arrived in the system expecting a fight. What they found was a revolution already in progress. The Methani had risen against their Concordat overseers, seizing weapons caches and capturing administrative centers. They were winning but barely. Without support, they would eventually be crushed. The human fleet didn't announce its presence with weapons fire. Instead, they broadcast a simple message on all frequencies. We're here to help. Colonel David Reyes led the ground forces personally. His troops landed not as conquerors but as allies. They fought alongside Methani rebels in the streets of their own cities, driving out the Concordat garrison block by block. When the fighting was over, Reyes gathered his officers on the steps of the former governor's mansion. Around them, Methani civilians were emerging from hiding, staring at the human soldiers with expressions of disbelief. "What do we do now?" one of his lieutenants asked. "They have no government, no infrastructure. We could install our own administration, set up a protectorate." "No." Reyes shook his head firmly. "This is their world, their choice. We help them rebuild. We share supplies and expertise. But we don't make decisions for them. Sir, with respect, they've never had self-government. They don't know how. Then they'll learn. Everyone has to learn sometime." Reyes looked out at the gathering crowd. "We didn't fight this war to become a new Concordat. We fought it to end the Concordat. That means actually ending it, not just replacing one set of masters with another." The Methani Elder Council requested a meeting that night. They offered alliance, resources, military support. They offered gratitude and loyalty and everything they had. Reyes accepted none of it. Instead, he asked a simple question: what do you need to stand on your own? The elders stared at him in confusion. No one had ever asked them that before. No one had ever suggested they might be capable of standing alone. "Think about it," Reyes said. "When you have an answer, let us know. We'll help however we can. But this is your world, your future. We're just here to make sure you get to choose it for yourselves." Word of what happened on Methani Prime spread faster than any fleet could travel. The humans weren't conquering. They weren't colonizing. They were liberating and then stepping back. It was unthinkable. It was unprecedented. And it terrified the Concordat more than any military defeat. On the Concordat capital world, the remaining council members met in desperate session. Their military was broken. Their economy was collapsing. Species they had ruled for millennia were rising against them, and the humans were coming closer every day. Ambassador Keth Voren, architect of the massacre at Kepler 442c, presented the council's options. His voice shook as he spoke. The confident bureaucrat who had ordered 17 miners executed was gone. In his place stood a frightened official watching everything he knew crumble around him. "We must negotiate," he said. "The war is lost. We must seek terms before they reach the homeworlds." "Negotiate?" Admiral Velthus, the new military commander, slammed his fist on the table. "After New Brisbane? They'll never negotiate. They want our extinction. Then we deploy more bioweapons. We have stockpiles, and invite every species in the galaxy to join against us? The Rithani are already mobilizing. The Keth Confederation is cutting ties. Even our client species are abandoning us. Another atrocity will only hasten our destruction. The debate raged for hours. In the end, they sent a message to Admiral Tanaka requesting negotiations. Their terms were insulting. Humanity would be granted provisional autonomy under continued Concordat oversight. In exchange, the humans would withdraw from Concordat space and surrender all captured territories. Tanaka received the message in her quarters. She read it twice to make sure she understood it correctly. Then she called her communication officer. "Connect me to the Concordat Council," she said. "Secure channel." When Keth Overand's face appeared on the screen, Tanaka didn't speak. She simply played a recording, the footage from New Brisbane. Children dying in the streets, families gasping their last breaths, the silence of a murdered world. She let it play for 5 minutes. Then she ended the transmission without saying a word. The negotiations were over before they began. Not everyone in the human fleet agreed with Tanaka's approach. The war had created divisions that ran deep. Captain Wei Chen commanded the cruiser Vengeance. He had lost his entire family on New Brisbane, his wife, his 3 children, his parents, everyone he had ever loved, dead in agony because the Concordat couldn't accept losing a single battle. He stood in Tanaka's office now, hands clenched at his sides, barely containing his fury. "We should burn them," he said. "Every Concordat world, every city, every civilian who cheered when New Brisbane happened. They deserve to feel what we felt." Tanaka listened in silence. She understood his pain. She felt echoes of it herself every time she closed her eyes. "And then what?" she asked quietly. "What do you mean?" "After we burn them. After we kill their civilians like they killed ours. After we become the monsters they always claim we were. What happens then?" Chen's jaw tightened. "Justice." "No." Tanaka shook her head slowly. "Not justice. Just another atrocity. Just another crime that future generations will have to answer for. Just another reason for someone to seek revenge against us someday." "So we let them go? After everything?" "No. We hold them accountable. We find the ones who ordered New Brisbane, and we try them for their crimes. We dismantle the systems that allowed such orders to be given. We build something better in the ashes of what they created." Tanaka's voice hardened. "But we don't become them. We don't murder children because their parents murdered ours. We don't prove them right about what humans are. They'll never understand mercy. They'll see it as weakness. Maybe, but our children won't. Our grandchildren won't. They'll grow up in a galaxy where humans had the power to destroy everything and chose not to. They'll inherit our choices, Chen. I want to leave them something they can be proud of." Chen stared at her for a long moment. The anger in his eyes didn't fade, but something else appeared alongside it, something that might have been understanding. "I can't forgive them," he said finally. "I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you to fight for something beyond revenge. I'm asking you to trust that we can build a future worth living in, even if it means carrying this pain with us forever." The silence stretched between them. Then Chen nodded slowly. "I'll follow your orders, Admiral, but I won't promise to agree with them. That's all I ask." The final offensive began 3 weeks later. Human forces, reinforced by Mathani volunteers and ships from half a dozen liberated species, converged on the Concordat core worlds. Admiral Tanaka led the fleet personally. Behind her flew 400 warships, battered and scarred but unbroken. Around them, the freed peoples of a dozen worlds followed the Deathworlders who had shown them what freedom looked like. The Concordat home fleet made its last stand at the approaches to Solari Prime. They were outnumbered now, outmaneuvered, outfought. The empire that had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years threw everything it had left at the human advance. It wasn't enough. The battle lasted 18 hours. When it ended, the Concordat fleet was gone. Human ships achieved orbital superiority over the heart of enemy civilization. Tanaka looked down at the blue-green world below, at the cities gleaming on its surface, at the millions of lives continuing unaware of the fleet hanging above them. "Admiral," her weapons officer said, "we have clear targeting solutions on all major population centers. One word and we end this war." Tanaka thought about New Brisbane, about Chen's family, about everyone who had died to bring them here. Then she thought about the future, about the kind of galaxy she wanted to build, about what she wanted humanity to become. No, she said, prepare landing forces. We're going down there to accept their surrender and begin reconstruction, not to destroy them. Her weapons officer hesitated. They wouldn't show us the same mercy. I know. Tanaka's voice was quiet but absolutely certain. That's exactly why we have to show it to them. Because if we don't, then we haven't won anything at all. We've just become the next Concordat, and the galaxy doesn't need another empire. It needs something better. The fleet held position, and the dropships began their descent toward a world that had spent centuries fearing humanity's wrath, about to learn something far more terrifying: humanity's mercy. The dropships descended through clouds that had never known war. Solari Prime was beautiful from above, all oceans and forests and cities of white crystal. It looked peaceful. It looked innocent. It looked nothing like the heart of an empire built on oppression. Admiral Tanaka rode in the lead transport, watching the surface grow closer through the viewport. Around her, soldiers checked their weapons and said quiet prayers. They were Deathworlders, bred for conflict, capable of destruction that would terrify any other species, and they were descending not to destroy, but to rebuild. The landing zone was a plaza in the capital city, surrounded by government buildings that had directed Concordat policy for millennia. Solari civilians lined the streets, held back by terrified police who expected mass execution at any moment. The human soldiers didn't fire a shot. They established a perimeter, set up medical stations, and began distributing emergency supplies to refugees who had fled the fighting elsewhere. The Solari watched in confusion, unable to understand what was happening. A child broke through the police line and ran toward the human position. Her mother screamed in terror, expecting her daughter to be cut down. Instead, a human medic caught the girl gently, checked her for injuries, and gave her a nutrient bar from his own rations. That image spread across Solari Prime within hours. The Deathworlders, the monsters, the savage creatures who should have been burning their cities, feeding their children instead. Nothing the Concordat had ever said about humans could survive that single moment of kindness. The formal surrender took place in the Grand Council chamber, the same room where Keth Vorin had once laughed at humanity's declaration of war. The remaining Concordat leadership sat at a long table, defeated and afraid. Admiral Tanaka stood across from them, flanked by commanders from a dozen species that had joined humanity's cause. The Concordat is dissolved, Tanaka announced. Her voice carried no triumph, no satisfaction, only weary determination. All territorial claims are void. All client species are released from their obligations. All debts are forgiven. The Solari leadership accepted without argument. They had no choice. Their fleet was destroyed, their allies had abandoned them, and the army that occupied their capital showed no interest in negotiating. "What happens to us now?" one of the council members asked. "Will there be executions?" "There will be trials." Tanaka's expression was hard. "Those responsible for war crimes will face justice. The architects of New Brisbane, the commanders who ordered atrocities, the officials who implemented genocide, and the rest of us, the ordinary citizens, the soldiers who followed orders. Ordinary citizens will be protected. We're not here to punish a species for the crimes of its government. We're here to ensure such crimes never happen again." She paused. "Soldiers who followed orders will be evaluated case by case. Those who had no choice will receive amnesty. Those who committed atrocities willingly will face consequences. This is justice? This is the beginning of justice. Justice takes time. It takes patience. It takes building something better than what came before." Tanaka gestured to the commanders beside her. "We're forming a new galactic assembly, equal representation, enforceable rights, no second-class species, no client races, no empires. You expect us to participate in this assembly? After everything? Yes, because the alternative is repeating the same mistakes that led us here. Someone has to be first to choose cooperation over domination. Someone has to show that it's possible." Tanaka's voice softened slightly. "Humanity could have burned your worlds. We chose not to. Now we're asking you to choose something different too." The silence stretched. Then slowly, the senior Solari delegate nodded. "We accept your terms," he said, "not because we have no choice, though we don't, but because you've shown us something we didn't believe existed. Mercy without weakness, strength without cruelty. Then let's begin." The trials lasted 3 years. Human judges worked alongside representatives from every affected species, ensuring that no single group controlled the outcome. The evidence was overwhelming. Documents, recordings, testimony from survivors and witnesses across the galaxy. Keth Voren was among the first to face judgment. He was captured trying to flee Solari Prime on a private shuttle, carrying enough wealth to live comfortably for 10 lifetimes. He stood before the tribunal with none of the arrogance that had defined his career. The charges against him included the Kepler 442C massacre, conspiracy to commit genocide, crimes against sentient species, and authorization of the New Brisbane bioweapon attack. The evidence was beyond dispute. His defense was simple. He had been following the will of the council. He had been implementing official policy. He was not personally responsible for decisions made by his superiors. The prosecution showed recordings of Keth Voren laughing as he ordered the miner's execution. They presented documents proving he had personally advocated for the bioweapon program. They brought witnesses who testified to his enthusiasm for the human problem's final solution. The tribunal deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, their verdict was unanimous, guilty on all counts. Keth Voren expected death. What he received was life imprisonment. He would spend his remaining years in a facility designed not for punishment, but for rehabilitation, required to watch footage of his crimes, to meet with survivors, to understand the full weight of what he had done. Some called this sentence too lenient. Admiral Tanaka disagreed. "Death is easy," she said when asked about the verdict. "Death ends responsibility. It lets the guilty escape the consequences of their choices. Keth Voren will spend every day of his life confronting what he did. He'll die knowing exactly who he was and what he cost the galaxy. That's not leniency, that's accountability." 1 year after the war's end, the first session of the new Galactic Assembly convened. Representatives from 47 species took their seats in a chamber built specifically for this purpose, on a neutral world that belonged to no one. The human delegation was led by Ambassador Sarah Chen, the young woman who had visited the Rathani Emperor with intelligence data during the war's darkest hours. She had grown into her role in the years since, becoming one of the most respected diplomats in known space. She stood before the assembly to deliver the opening address. "We gather here not as conquerors and conquered," she said, "not as masters and servants. We gather as equals, united by a simple belief that the galaxy can be better than it has been, that cooperation can replace domination, that diversity can be a strength instead of a threat." She looked around the chamber, at faces and forms representing every civilization humanity had encountered. The old way failed. It failed because it was built on fear and control. It failed because it treated some lives as worth less than others. It failed because it believed that power meant the right to decide who mattered. Her voice grew stronger. "We're building something new. It won't be perfect. We'll make mistakes. We'll disagree. We'll frustrate each other in 1,000 ways. But we'll do it as partners, as equals, as people committed to something larger than ourselves." She paused, letting the words settle. "Humanity didn't seek this war. We endured 3 centuries of abuse before we fought back. But having fought, having won, we choose to build rather than destroy. We choose to heal rather than punish. We choose to remember without choosing to hate." Sarah Chen smiled, and in that smile was all the hope that humanity had carried through the darkness. "Welcome to the future," she said. "Let's make it worth fighting for." 2 years later, on Kepler 442C, where 17 miners had died and a war had begun, a memorial stood in the plaza outside the old processing plant. The monument was simple: 17 pillars of native stone, each carved with a name and a face. At its base, an inscription in 100 languages. They died because they were human. We remember them because we refuse to forget what that means. A Solari maintenance worker tended the grounds now, keeping the memorial clean and the gardens healthy. Her name was Veltha, and her grandfather had served in the Concordat military. She had grown up believing humans were dangerous animals, barely sentient, deserving of everything that happened to them. Then she had watched human soldiers feed a frightened child while her world surrendered. She had applied for work at the memorial the day it opened. She had been here every day since, learning the names of the dead, researching their lives, understanding who they had been before fear and hatred ended their stories. A human man approached the monument as she worked. He was old, his hair gray, and his movements slow. He stood before one of the pillars, the one marked Chen Wei Lin, and placed his hand on the cold stone. Veltha recognized him from the historical records. Marcus Webb, the foreman who had survived the massacre, the man whose promise had helped ignite a war. She approached carefully, unsure of her welcome. "Do you hate us?" she asked. "For what we did?" Marcus turned to look at her. His eyes held depths of pain that 3 years hadn't diminished. But something else lived there too, something that might have been hope. "I hated you for a long time," he admitted. "Every day I woke up wanting revenge, wanting to see your worlds burn like New Brisbane burned." "What changed?" "I met a Silari child on a relief mission. She was scared of me. She'd been told all her life that humans were monsters. I could have proven her right. Instead, I gave her my ration pack and helped her find her parents." He turned back to the memorial. "Chen would have done the same thing. She was like that, always looking for reasons to hope instead of reasons to hate." He touched the stone gently. "I couldn't honor her memory by becoming the thing she fought against." Veltha stood beside him, looking at the names of the dead. "We learn about this in school now," she said, "about what the Concordat did, about why it was wrong. My daughter asked me once why our people did such terrible things. I didn't have a good answer. No one ever does," Marcus sighed. "That's why we build memorials, so the next generation asks the questions we couldn't." They stood together in silence, human and Solari, once enemies, now sharing a moment of remembrance for people they had never known. Finally, Marcus spoke again. "It means we chose to remember without choosing to hate," he said, reading the inscription. "And that made all the difference." He placed a small flower at the base of Chen's pillar. Then he turned and walked away, leaving Veltha alone with the dead and the living memory of what had been and what could be. The sun set over Kepler 442c. The stars emerged one by one, the same stars that had erupted with war and now watched a galaxy slowly learning to live in peace. And somewhere in the darkness between worlds, humanity continued to build, continued to hope, continued to prove that the strongest thing in the universe wasn't the power to destroy. It was the courage to create something better.